and would I say certain expectations of you as an academic. So for instance, most of the professors publishing in top trade publishers or university presses. And so I don't think that self-published books are very much accepted in the academic field, especially to go through the traditional route of publishing. I really don't know if it's subjective. Yeah, so I really don't know how that might impact your work. But I feel most academics expect that you follow through the traditional path of publishing.
So I don't know that it would make any difference. I know I met someone who got into Cornell after having written, he said just 3 stories. I think he's incredibly talented. And nothing even published any of the 3 stories. And Cornell receives an awful lot of applications, about 700, sometimes 1,000. And he actually got in. So I think some people are closet writers and don't send out their work as much as others. And I think the faculty is aware of this. And so I think what they care more about is how unique is this person's voice? How strong is it? How well do they write? I know we all know an African writer who lives in the US who got her first book deal for I think it was the first time an African was ever getting a 6-figure book deal in the publishing industry, in the global publishing industry. And she hadn't published one short story. She didn't even have an MFA. Sometimes it doesn't matter whether or not you have a self-published book or you have a book. But then again, if you're asking with regards to the job market, I think what they care about is how well the book did. So if you have a self-published book that didn't do well, then it won't make any difference. Or it wouldn't matter. It won't even increase your chances or make any difference. But I think I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, just to add to it, I know I have a friend who's currently doing the MFA program, and he has several self-published books, right? So I think that shows or proves to the faculty that this person is a disciplined writer, right? And so what they might need is a bit of more training or formal training for them to get their work out there. So I don't think it spoils your chances if you have a self-published book. What matters is more of your writing sample. But I feel this self-published book might just feel like, oh, this writer or this person has the ability to complete a work of art.
Okay, thank you. There are a couple of questions in the chat, which I'll be reading out. The first one says, hi, I wanted to know if you have any advice about recommenders.
So I'll take that one. I think for recommenders, it's important to look to people in the industry that you've actually taken workshop classes with. Say you've gone to a workshop or you've done so and so in the field, also shows you as someone who is serious about your craft and about your profession as a creative writer. And so if you get recommenders from people in the field, you will increase your chances of getting it. I attended a panel discussion at the University of, I think it was Florida State University, yes. And someone asked this question, and the professor said at least 2 out of 3 recommenders should come from renowned writers in the field. So chances are that if you've attended a workshop, there'll be people who thought the workshop will be people who have published, who have taught, who have MFA degrees and things like that. And so I think the faculty would listen to them, or the admission committee would listen to them and take their words seriously if they vouch for you as a writer. Another place you could also look at would be editors you've worked with. You've volunteered at festivals. Often those festivals, take for instance, Ake, would be run or organized by accomplished writers as well. And so you can also get recommendation from them. So if you work for a magazine, if you volunteer or work for a literary magazine, then you can actually ask the editor or someone from the field. You would have access to people in the field who can actually speak to a certain aspect of your work, not just as a writer, but also as somebody who's good at building community within the literary space or contributing to the field of creative writing in some way or the other. I'm going to let other people speak.
Does anyone want to add to that?
I think Choma has said everything. So yeah, I don't have anything to add, but I think it can be mixed though, but let it be someone who really understands your writing. And it's not just about the idea of recommendation letter. It's not just about someone knowing your work, but also if you can commit to graduate school programs, to the challenges that comes with graduate school programs. Sometimes they want to know issues. And I think this is why sometimes you have to do interview too, right? When you get accepted, to know your mental capability. I know I've written recommendation letters for several people, and I know when I'm submitting these letters, they sometimes ask questions that sometimes are related to like mental issues, which can be very annoying. Does this person have the capability to survive this? And then you need to answer very good. And just to know also your teaching or your ability to write. So within that, let's say three things: writing or editing or questions related to mental issues.
Proceed, and then I will come back in. But I just
Okay.
wanted to add to something Tega already said. Your recommender should be able to speak about your writing samples. So you don't want somebody that will just say, "Oh, he's kind, he's hardworking, and they can write very well," whatever that means. You want somebody that will say, "Wow, they explore themes of and so." For instance, in this story, the writer explored this character's emotions or dilemma regarding their identity or things like that in such a way that have not been explored or in other works of literature or in very few works of literature. So somebody can speak authoritatively about your work, not just generally. And so I didn't have very famous people write letters of recommendation for me. Often the people, basically everyone that wrote a letter of recommendation for me was a writer who I had met at a workshop. I only had one person who had taught me, I think, Chika Onigwe, but everybody else were just writers who were serious about their craft and who had edited work before, but could speak about my work as a writer. And I think it's more important to have people who will take the time to read your work and analyze it and talk about it in detail than people who are very popular and have big names. I'm sorry, Damien, please go ahead.
So I wanted to also add that if you've ever been in a workshop space, it's best you can also get the recommendation letter from the mentor or the organizer, because they would speak to you being a good citizen of the workshop space. When they look at your recommendation, some of them will really want to know the kind of person you are in the workshop space. They wouldn't want someone who is so insensitive or someone who is toxic. Or as Chibike was saying, I think that's where the mental stuff comes into play. They want someone who is like compassionate enough and who gives feedback and who also knows how to receive feedback. And also, if you've worked as a reader from the magazine, I think that you would also ask the magazine for recommendation letter. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next question. As non-Americans, how do you discuss your literary influences in your SOP? Do you advise naming some American writers as well?
Okay, I'll to jump in here. So first of all, African literature is global literature. The faculty, trust that the faculty has read, so you don't want to pigeonhole yourself and say, "Oh, I'm African. Don't want to start with my writing or the people I have read in the past." I love Benokri has won the Booker Prize. I love Adichie. Adichie is a global phenomenon. So you have to just trust that who you've read is valid and is also known. But you should be able to, don't just name drop, "Oh, these are my influences." Talk about how their style has also influenced you. For example, if you read Adichie, what do you draw from her writing? If you read, say, Wole Soyinka, and what has he taught you about poetry? And then you're able to advance knowledge of your influence on the page, so that even if the faculty has not even heard about these writers, they can be interested in wanting to know and go and read about them for themselves. Yeah, so that's not a challenge. Just be comfortable and then don't lie. Like Timothy says, don't just name drop on lives. Okay, these are my influences. Because they might call for an interview and then you might not be able to really defend what you've written.
Does anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, so the idea of influences, I don't like using the word influences. I think the right way to put it is writers you're in conversation with. And in conversation, it could be not just in terms of the style of writing, but also in terms of the thematic discussions, right? So if you mentioned she, it could be how she handles issue of, let's say, of feminine discussions in a literary work, how you are in conversation with her. You can just talk about this. The surprising thing is that about this faculty that or most professors here is that they read widely too, right? And they are always looking for books to include in their syllabus. So sometimes when you mention these African writers, they are interested in them, right? I know in my own 2 classes, for example, 2 professors included books I mentioned or I talked about for a workshop class. So it's always good for you to mention them. Don't be shy, even though they are African writers. Just mention them and how you're in conversation with them. Sometimes it could be in terms of like style, experimental could be like digital, or you can maybe talk about themes. Those 2 things influences or how you engage in conversation with your own work and with these authors too.
Just to add quickly, right? African writers are doing very good, right? There's hardly any global magazine or global publishing house that you will not see a Nigerian or an African. So you have to hold your head very high in the application process and trust that your voice really matters. Yeah, it starts from, you build the confidence from the very first line of your application.
Yeah. So I think Fortune has a question. Yeah.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? All right, so my question is, for example, some universities in their statement of purpose, they require you to critique your work. So how do you work towards that? Like, how do you present that, critiquing your work, instead of just writing a regular statement of purpose?
I didn't get the question, sorry.
Okay, for example, John Hopkins University. So when you're submitting your statement of purpose, they require you to critique your work, your writing sample, your statement of purpose. So how do you implement that in your statement of purpose?
Okay, so I applied to Hopkins, but I didn't get it. I can't remember the whole application process if you have to do the whole thing in one statement of purpose, right? But I think most times it's just to talk about, I guess you just need to divide your SOP into 2 parts, right? The part 1 could be you talking about or expressing yourself or selling yourself as a writer. Who are you as a writer, right? And then the second part, you can talk about the work itself, where you have to engage with what you think it's working in the story and what you need to improve or you are improving or you want to improve on, but you are struggling as a writer, perhaps, so that it might just be how this faculty can maybe help you. Could be talking about issue of structure, like you're always going somewhere with structure, or it could be that idea of like world building also that you feel it's not like happening in this work. So just be, I don't know how to put it, but it's always difficult to talk about your own work, but sometimes can just talk about issues that people have said about your own work. What general thing have you noticed? And are you struggling with that work? It can sometimes show, I think it's just to show the faculty that you as a writer, you can critique other people's work. And you can also give like suggestions for like also improve. They just want to know how good you are when it comes to critiquing your cohort's work.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Chibike. I want to add that I would approach that sort of prompt in the way that I would approach writing a feedback letter. So one thing we have to do in the as MFA students or candidates is sit in workshop settings, having read other people's work and written feedback letters. So a feedback letter has several parts. There'll be the introductory part where you talk about what you think the work is trying to do using craft terms. Terms like, okay, what's the point of view? What's the central image? What argument is the central image trying to make? What question is the story trying to answer? What thematic statement is it trying to make if it's that kind of story? And then you go into what's working, what it does well, and then what can be improved, like Chibike said. So you want that sort of statement to be quite balanced. But I think they expect you to be able to do all of those in probably a paragraph or 2. It's going to be a tall order because you have other things to talk about And I don't know, like Chubike said, it's difficult to tell now if that sort of sample is supposed to be a separate document on its own or if it has to be part of the SOP itself. But if they just want explicitly for you to be able to discuss the work, critique would be to have a balanced discussion about a project, like a story, for instance, what's working, what's it trying to do. So if you can't understand what the story is trying to do, if you can't articulate it well, then you failed in your critique, so to speak. I just read a sample SOP that got someone into Stegner. And the writer started out with saying, talking about how they tend to digress a lot in their short stories and how reading Alice Munro has helped them learn that, okay, you can digress, but still keep a story within the confines of its limits in a way that short stories tend to restrict or require people to do. So I love that he was also critiquing himself, but talking about how he had overcome those challenges. So he knows, okay, I tend to digress a lot and then to write stories that can spin out into novels. This is how I've overcome that. And so they can see that can be a strength because you're probably more of a novel writer, but you're also very interested in writing a short story and you understand what the requirements of the form are. So I think that's what they just want you to like demonstrate that strength and that understanding of what the form requires. Thank you.
I think with regards to that, you also need to be careful between in how you write or how you approach the critique in terms of strength and weakness. So you don't end up like being so vulnerable and you like showing the vulnerability in your work. And I think like one way to approach, don't just like, do paragraph whereby you have like strengths and then weakness. You could try to integrate it. And then I think one way to approach the weakness of your work is to pose it as a question. So for instance, like, what is this work doing? And I think so I just put up the requirement and it says, I think the last one of the sentences says, it should convey a sense of tone and approach by which the applicant hopes to contribute to the writing workshops. So I feel if you pose this in the form of like question, that shows that, oh, this person is like very much like aware of, like you're not like imposing your own readership on a piece of writing, but you're actually like using like inquiry method to approach a work by asking, oh, what is this doing? How can this be approached differently? Or how can this do something differently? So I feel like that and just try to integrate it, both the strength and the weakness together. So you don't have a place that highlights only the strength and then the other part just the weakness.
Thank you. That was really good. Thank you. I didn't think of that. Questions, my goodness. That's one thing I learned to frame and develop in the MFA program, learning to present critiques as questions, because I think those are the best sort of critiques. Thank you, Damian. If nobody else has an answer to that question, Chris Ba also has his hand raised. Fortune, are you satisfied with the answer we gave? Or
Yes,
the
I'm
answers
very much
provided?
satisfied. Yes,
All
I'm
right.
satisfied. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So we'll go on to Chris Ba. Chris, can you unmute yourself and ask your question? Okay, if Chris isn't, hold on, let me see. Okay, if Chris isn't here and ready to ask his question, we'll go to Onyeche.
Sorry, I think my airport had a little info. Hello, everyone. Hi, Damien. So my question would be with regards to the party sample. I think Damien mentioned something about you acting at the faculty level of and how maybe your work leads to that. And I was thinking in your party sample, would be okay for you to maybe send the work after one of the faculty writers? Would it be still basic or did it actually help your portfolio, your sample as an applicant? So
So I don't think it might help. So if I were a faculty and I'm reading a sample and I see after I would go through Damian, I would know that this is like very performative. So it's best for you to avoid that. Just like I think what I did during my own turn was like I had works that I wanted to submit wanted to use as a writing sample. And then for each school I had on my list, I go to their faculty website and I read all I look at the poetry faculty and then I read all their sample, I Google their names and I read their work. And sometimes I even go to read their latest book or download it illegally and then read their latest book. Sorry about that. just to get a vibe of which of them. You know what's not about like writing is that like you can find like a point of reference with any work of literature. You just have to be smart in how you approach that. For instance, in my school, I read the 4 poetry faculty, and my work resonated with one of them, with 2 of them, but I felt like I would make a very stronger case with just one of them because we really write about desire. And I didn't even know anything about like I wasn't even paying attention to the structure of the work. I just wrote about like how we approach desire. And then when we finally met, and then he was like, even the structure of our work is like very similar. I was like, oh wow. And then I started reading his work and I started seeing the similarities. So even I feel like even if you mustn't write on the same theme, you could just look at if they have 4 faculties, just look at them. Then at least there is like someone whose work you can actually find and then trying to like see that like you can try to like you can read a similarity like into one at least one of their works. So that's just like a way to begin to like when you find the similarities, then you can then go back to your writing sample and try to see ways to be like very much deliberate in having it like being conversational, not just being conversational, like at least having it like being conversation with the faculty and also trying to expand more on your statement of purpose. I think that would help. But you don't need to write after because that's obviously like signals that this is like performative.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Do you still have more questions, Chris, or has Damian answered your question as well? Okay, so in the absence of any other questions from our last speaker, I want to know if there are other people who raised their hands but haven't been called upon. You can just unmute your mic and ask because I'm quite confused.
I haven't been called upon yet.
Okay, so Oniche, I guess you can proceed.
Yes, so I have a question. I generally curious to know if anyone knows or has any information or advice or resources concerning integrated MFAs in creative writing. I was doing an undergraduate degree in creative writing and I had to leave school for a bit and come back. And I just wanted to know if anyone knows anything about me being able to combine an undergraduate and postgraduate degree and basically get an integrated MFA in creative writing. If that's a thing anyone, I know people do it, but I don't know how much information there is out there concerning it.
I don't think I've ever heard of integrated MFA, or maybe I don't understand.
Same here, so the term is quite new to me, but it sounds personal to have integrated MFA. It sounds something that I would like to have myself. Sounds good.
So I'm guessing if you are trying to combine this MFA program with an undergraduate degree program in your home country, then you'll be thinking about doing a low residential program where you probably have to come in to the school maybe once every month or once every 3 months, depending on how the low residential program is structured to then receive your classes. Because from what we know about MFA programs, often the fully funded ones in particular are usually like very intensive and they require you to be a full-time student. They don't allow you to do it on a part-time basis because they require you to work in the department. They want you to teach. They want you to do research. They want you to be invested in the school. And there isn't any room anyway for you to maybe be working outside of the program. Often you would have to quit your job and move to the county or to the town where your school is situated to invest yourself in the programs. If I understood what you said correctly, you wanted something you could combine and run alongside an undergraduate degree program. I think the only ones that might let you do that will be a low residential program. And I think you can find a list in that document that I put in the chat. I actually included a link to the poets and writers list of MFA programs, and you'll find low residential programs there. And then you can look into them to see if they'll sort of accommodate your needs. Yeah, but you'll also have to think about how to navigate the visa requirements, except you're a US citizen or you have a green card and you can come and go as you please, then of course that'll be a different issue. But if you want to be based somewhere else and doing the integrated MFA program elsewhere, you might want to think about how that might pose some obstacle for you as an international student as well. I hope I answered your question. You're welcome to ask further questions if there's something I missed or didn't understand.
I appreciate the lowest answer. I think from the reading I've done, it's just basically a combination of a BA and an MFA. So you're doing both the degrees at the same time. So I think the idea is that you're supposed to spend either a shorter amount of time in school or a longer, I don't know, a longer amount of time. Also, Nigerian too, so yes. And I'm actually working right now, and I was just thinking about how I would like to go back to school and finish my undergraduate degree, but then I am getting older as well, and I wanted to see if I could just do everything together. And then I found out about combined degrees or integrated degrees. I don't know, I just felt like maybe I could ask how somebody who could have an idea, maybe give me some type of pointers, basically.
Yeah, and I think as someone already said, most schools, if not all schools, have a requirement of a bachelor's. So they expect that you already have a bachelor's degree, and if before you can then proceed to do and that's the most that I know about. There have been exceptions, but those exceptions are quite rare. And usually those people would have done like some sort of associate degree programs in the US in maybe Ivy League schools like Harvard, and that would be seen as a degree of sorts. But like I said, those are exceptions.
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe you might want to transfer your credits from your undergraduate school to a program in the US, but I don't think it's allowed for masters. For example, if you did 2 years of undergraduate work in Nigeria, you might reach out to maybe the English department where creative writing classes are offered and say, oh, you know what, I'm interested in creative writing. I have some credits. Is it possible that I transfer my credits to your school so you can come to complete your degree in some way in the US? But I doubt it's possible. I don't know if it's possible for you to transfer from the undergraduate to the MFA straight away.
Yeah, I'm going to add to what Taga said. I've seen people who have come from, there's someone I know who came from Germany with 2 master's degrees, did 1 year of a PhD in the English program at the University of Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, and decided to then transfer to Cornell. So despite all of their master's degrees and the PhD they had already started out in Madison, they had to start over at Cornell. They weren't allowed, to move even one single credit. They had to start over, and that's how it works here from my experience anyway.
Yeah, I think I have a question from Praise on the chat. So he says, do you think as a poet, it's okay if I read all the poets professors in the faculty and talk about their work in my SOP, or that would be pretentious? And again, would it be okay if I make it look like I can generally work with anybody assigned to me in the faculty? So I would say I think it depends on how you handle the language in terms of mentioning all the professors there and talking about their work, because that would also eat up like word count. I think some schools have 500 words or like 750 words. But like a perfect way to do that, and I think I was discussing with my friend about, because I wrote like a STEM SOP for a school, and my friend was like, oh, you mentioned just one professor. So what if this professor is like someone they don't like in the faculty? And then that would show that, oh, you're already like pledging allegiance to like the bad guy. And so he was like, oh, at least 2 or 3. But then I think the difference is that my language I was saying I would like to work with, which is like very risky when you say I would like to work with. So I think like the best way to be neutral is like just saying, I find Professor Chibike's work very this, and then because of the way they use this and that, and then you're like, full stop, you also see that in your own work. Instead of saying that I would like to work with. So just try to be like, when you're done writing your statement of purpose, go over to the language and be sure that you're not using language of how you like to work, but you're just like talking about, oh, you see this, as though you're critically engaging the person's work and you're trying to draw conversation with yours. And then if you want to be on the safer side, you could just like, two names is like fine, but then just don't go. I feel like listing a lot of them might become, if you list like all of the project, it becomes performative. If you list and talk about each and every one of them, it's gonna eat up word counts. And then I think there's also a very thin line between, is this person trying to get us, or is this person being genuine? And also I think the idea of, it looks general that you can work with any professor. I think the only reason why I include names in my SOP is just because he worked for my MFA, and I feel like because I mentioned the professor's name, like he really advocated for me. And then when I got here, he signed my book. He was like, I really wanted to work with you. He signed his book for me. And so that was just like, I think that's the only reason why I include names. But then when I got here, and then he did push back with like other faculty, currently the person who is my thesis advisor is not the professor I wrote on my statement of purpose, because like when I go here, I have to observe, even though like my work resonates with the professor who I already mentioned on my SOP, but he's not like he's not loud in his support. So my thesis chair is like someone she's always like very, like, she's well known in the US, she's like popular, she's also loud in her support, she likes to make noise. So that's one of the reasons why I chose her, because like you're thinking about like career wise, like the writing, like obviously the writing, you can do the writing, feedback, you can get feedback from your peers. So I'm thinking about like connection. So that's just it. So like the main thing about like listing names or like writing names in your SOP is just to show that you're genuinely interested in somebody's work, and to have someone who might advocate for you in the admission committee. But then once you get there, you can actually switch up and find the best person, because you don't really know them. You just know their work at that point.
Yeah, that's really good. Thanks, Damian. I want to add to that, even though I'm not a poet, but I've heard like a wide range of advice regarding whether or not to mention people in your SOPs. And so I went with, for my MFA, I didn't mention anybody. I don't know what that signals. I didn't mention anybody from the department, and I still got into 4 programs. And what I did was mention something about the program itself. So I was like, oh, you guys have a reading series that I think would help me interact with more writers and learn how these things are done in community. And so I was like, oh, I'm interested in these programs you people have. And I think this town will be suitable for me because it's quiet, it's not in a big city, or it's in a big city or whatever. And I think that was all I did. I tried not to mention people. I tried to mention the program and special things about the program that I thought I liked. So if the program was like a 3-year program or a 2-year program, I would say, oh, I need a 3-year program because I want time to write. And if it was like a 2-year program, I would be like, oh, a 2-year program is ideal for me because I think I'm ready to go. It's about being, so I played it the way a politician would play it, because I heard, like Damien also said, the person you mentioned might not be the person who would read it. And the person would be like, everybody keeps mentioning this dude that I don't like. And it's one reason why I'll drop your sample or whatever. So it can go either way. You could get lucky, you might not. Yeah.
Yeah. So just to add to that, like the idea of mentioning someone on your SOP is like very risky. Like I see it as risky, but then it depends on how you do it. So when I mention names in my SOP, I mention it like towards the part where you're talking about like why you like the program, why you want to why the school, or like why the program. So there's a way you like integrate or try to be. So it appears as though you're talking about the program, and then you're mentioning, you're just like, oh, you also like this. Not just that you have a paragraph talking about like people you would like to work with. I think that becomes like very risky. But then if you're talking about that in terms of the reason why you want to be part of the program, then that makes sense. And also it's very risky because you might be mentioning the professor's name and the professor is like leaving the program the next year. So that's why if you don't say I would like to work with, it's always best to just say I find this person's work, even though this is like very not polished, but like I find this person's work interesting in the way they use, in the way they are like, then they explore like gender, which is like this blah 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 blah. But they don't like say I would like to work with you, because like most of the professors, like some of them are like leaving programs and going to like other schools, or some of them are like on sabbatical that you might not get to, they might not get to teach you, or like you might not even get to see them throughout your stay.
Yeah, sorry to cut in. There's something Choma mentioned, which I think it's very beautiful. This sense of like community, right? It's always important to include it in your SOP. Like, how can you be like a community member to the school? What can you offer to the school, right? So Choma mentioned that idea of reading series. I know in my school when I was writing, I think I wrote about the sense of like community member being like participating. So they have this community outreach fellowship where you have to teach people outside the university. You have to teach at the library. So I mentioned that in my SOP of wanting to be like a community member, and this is what I can offer, teach creative writing outside the university. And a professor also mentioned it too when she was talking about applying to MFA programs. Sometimes the school want to know like, how can you be helpful to the program in terms of, or apart from just saying you want to apply so that you have time and space to write, but what can you also offer to the program? So it could be like maybe you having like editorial services. Perhaps you have worked with a number of literary journal and you think you can bring this experience to the program. Perhaps you've taught creative writing and you can also offer these services to the program too.
And I think it's important to mention that it might be different. The criteria is usually different for PhD programs. When I was applying to PhD programs, I got into two. I mentioned, like in one sentence, in the way that Damien Ugochukwu just recommended, oh, this person's work does this, and in that way. But for the MFA, I think what I've heard so far is that you have to be strategic about why you're mentioning, who you're mentioning, and to also go off of what Chibuike already said, think about what you can bring into the program and highlight that. So there are many ways to talk about why you're interested in a specific program beyond mentioning the names of faculty. So if you want to, if you are like a very anxious person like me and you want to play safe, that might be a way to go. Any more questions or?
Eric has a follow-up question.
Okay, do you want to read it
says,
out?
Yes, I want to read it out. Do you recommend mentioning that your work has some connection with that of someone who has just joined faculty or who is going to join the faculty in the coming year?
I would say this is also risky. Like you have to be sure before I mention names. I look at the faculty, I look at their CV, not like look at their CV to be sure like how far they've been in the school. Because if you mention someone new, the person is not obviously not reading your application. And when I say mention, I'll be like, there's a strategic way to do that. For instance, if the person's work resonates with yours, you can be like, for instance, it would be like a line, like we were talking about your influences. It would be like authors such as Richard Saikin, Jericho Brown, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie have all considered how the queer body relates to body and blah blah blah. Just like you know how you just make it so it sounds as though you're not like pandering to someone, but you're just genuinely like interested in the person's not they're genuinely interested in the person, or you see what the person is doing, but you're not just like pandering to the person. I think that example is, let me see something. I guess if I pull it out, I'll read it for you. But something like really Tega, Chibuike, and Chioma, the way they write about, let's say, gender, and then you just give a sentence, and you've just grouped them into two, and then you've said something important, and you're not just pandering to just one person. And this could be, you could mention like someone, for instance, if the person is a new faculty, and you also see that your work, if your work genuinely like resonates with the person's work, and also like someone outside of like your work is in conversation with like other writers outside, you can form that as a small of like listing their names and then adding like one strong sentence that ties the work they do. So that way it becomes like it's not performative. The person's there, someone who is the, or this person is like genuine. But then there are also like other ways to like highlight interest in the program. That's why I said that like the listing name is like it's very risky because there are ways to do it and it becomes performative. Like when I had it in my SOP, it was very performative at first. I had to go through many drafts with my friend. And then that was the only way that it just signaled like being that it was like I was trying to get this person's attention.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think if you are maybe confused about that, if you should add like a faculty member's name or not, I think it's always best to just skip that and instead focus on the program itself. Like just do like research on the program itself. It could be like what they offer to students, like that idea of teaching or that idea of working as a journal editor that you have like passion for. It could be that idea of the classes they offer, right? Like, for example, taking classes or having a minor. I know my program can allow you to have a minor in gender studies and peace studies. You can just use that to talk about, or including your SOP, just to make you like stand out if you are confused or if you are doubting yourself about just including like a faculty member.
Yeah, and I think like another thing is that another way to also personalize the last paragraph of your SOP is by asking people in the program. So for instance, if you go through my program's website and then you're writing reasons why you're interested in the program, that would work. But if I tell you things, internal things about my program, I could give you more specific details about the and then that would strengthen your last paragraph. And that way is also to like go through. I think some universities like publish their like course schedule in terms of the classes they take in the fall and the spring. Just go through it and look through and then see what you can like. If that's like a thing you want to talk about, if the classes they're interested in, yeah. So that could just be a way to personalize the last paragraph many ways. But then I would recommend like accessing someone in the program because they will give you like more detailed information compared to what on the website.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think Ugochukwu mentioned something interesting about emailing someone in the program. So if you have a Nigerian in the program, so you can ask them to read your SOP. I know I have two Nigerians, like during when I was a student there, who emailed me their SOP and I read and I gave them feedback about what the school or doing MFA here is, and they got into the program and they already attended. So it's always best if you have a Nigerian in that program to send them an email. And do this quite early. Just send them an email and tell it, could you please help me read my either the writing sample or the SOP, which is very important. I'm applying to your program, and they can give you our feedback.
Does anybody want to add to that? Okay. I am not seeing any questions in the chat. Is there anyone with questions? One final question so we can wrap up. Okay. I guess we can. Okay, there are two questions now. Salvation is asking if they can get to your social. So it would be lovely if you can put it in the chat so that they can connect with you and follow you. Then Praise also ask, how do you have to title your SOP?
I'm going to answer the second question. No, you don't have to title your SOP. But other people, I've seen people who have. I don't know that it makes a world of difference. So I think the only thing I do is have a generic title, statement of purpose. Like when I remembered to put that. But I think, yeah, I don't know. I think there was a time when I put an address, but I think for when I got in, I didn't bother putting any address, like maybe a formal address. Okay, this is my home address and this is the school's address. I didn't do that in the year that I got in. So I think I just put statement of purpose just so that they know what documents it is, especially if you have to send several documents as part of your application portfolio. But other people might have. All right, sorry.
So I have read lots of SOPs, and some persons personalize their type, and you could get creative with it, but just make sure it's not derailing from your focus, and then it works with what you're writing. For example, if you're writing about trauma, you could have a title that is informative, but to use Ogochukwu's point, not performative, right? Your focus should be on your writing sample. That's what gets you into the MFA program. If it's strong, if it's wonderful, that's like your major focus. And then they look at the SOP. So Do not spend so much time trying to decorate, trying to just tell your story and then get done with it. The title is like the last thing you think about when it comes to writing the SOP. But if you can put a very good title beyond just the words, statement of purpose, if you can write something that is really inviting, and then the work itself is also inviting, then go for it.
Yeah, so that's what Tega said. If you're interested in maybe using title, if you feel like, make sure or ensure like the title is thematic. It's because I feel like the SOP is more of like on a thematic topic. Like you're talking about yourself and you're expressing like what your work can do and why you're interested. So you have to look for like a thematic topic or title that might just capture the whole SOP. But I don't know how it will work. I can't say the writing of trauma. It's a bit funny, but I can't give you the right title. But it's very hard for you to title your SOP. But just make sure if you're intended to let it be thematic.
Yeah, like I feel like if the title is like good, like 1% or 0.1% of good, then you have a chance. Because like the people are reading this are reading like slush pies. And I feel if the title is like catchy, not like catchy, but if it's very good, it draws attention. But then if it's messed up, it's an easy way to throw out an SOP without even like reading through, because they're like, oh, this person doesn't really even understand what they're doing, and then you just throw it away. So I would say avoid that, except your title is like exceptional. Because I think I've seen an SOP that had like a title and it was like very good. I like that made me want to read it. But aside from that, yeah, so there's a thin line between you doing like a very basic thing and you're doing something exceptional, or like or like overdoing the thing.
Yeah, I also want to quote Elizabeth McCracken. She is on the faculty at the University of Texas. I think one of those big programs. I think it's probably called the New Writers Program. She's very popular, and I have quotes from her in that post on how to write your SOP on our blog. And she said the SOP is where you actually show yourself to be this sane person who can function in like a structured environment. And so they don't expect plenty of experimentation or avant-garde writing in the SOP. However, okay, she's a missioner. Thank you. Peachy. Yeah, she said the missioner center. But she said the writing sample is where you show yourself as this weird, crazy artist. And so you want to be careful with your SOP and just quote unquote go straight to the point. I've seen an SOP, like Tega said, SOPs can take all sorts of forms. I've seen an SOP that was just a paragraph long, just a paragraph. And I think they got into pretty much every school they applied to. And I've heard a faculty member say, oh, they read an SOP that was great. And the writing sample was nah. And they were like, we can't accept somebody based on the SOP. So I don't think everyone else has said that you should like sweat over something like the title.
Sweat over punctuation, right? Edit your fiction, your poetry, focus on making your sample very strong. You don't want people to be reading your work, get worked up by the lack of punctuation or other basic grammar rules. So focus on your sample.
Okay, there's a new question. How risky is it to use experimental work?
It's risky. It's very risky, but it depends on the program, right? Because I know mine is like an experimental program, but I know that even when like a student or my coach should bring an extra work to class, we read it from like with our traditional lines, we question it. So the workshop is always, the workshop is always a testing ground for us to see if what we are experimenting about is working. But in terms of experimental, I think you have to let it come with that sense of clarity. Can I read your work without asking you questions, like in an easy way? So structure. So let's say if you're reading Adichie's Americana, for example, in terms of structure, Adichie is very experimental in terms of structure, but the structure does not call to you, look at me, I'm being experimental here. So you need to write. I think the best way is for you to write in a way that comes with clarity, that I can read this work without asking you a question, like calling you, oh, what are you trying to do here and all that. So if you feel like experimenting, good, but make sure it carries like clarity, right? It's very clear. Your writing is clear. I can read it easily, right? Without calling on people. So you might experiment. I think most times when people experiment, when it comes to fiction, it's in terms of like the structure or the use of point of view. So it's, if you can just write and then give it to people to read, if the writing comes with clarity, without so much question on what you're experimenting with, I think it's fine.
To add something to that, I think Taga said something about MFA programs being drawn to avant-garde writing or writing that sort of sets you apart. Often it will be the voice, it can be the structure. Sometimes these things can't be separated. I'm thinking about, I don't know if anyone has read Justin Torres's We the Animals. So I was cleaning at one of my professor's offices and I was private. Oh my God, I don't know if I should say this when I'm recording this, but I should stop recording. I will pause and then give you guys the secrets. Okay.
We're taking the final question. The final question so that we can wrap up. Otherwise, we'll be here till the end of the day. Is it all right to indicate that your work is written after a particular work? Is the question clear?
I don't know. For me, I think I'll always try to be original when I'm submitting for this kind of thing, because you never know what, it's always subjective. You never know what, let's say, faculty member is going to say. So it's always best for you to be like original with what you're sending, because I think one of the things they look at for is that this is somebody they can work with, right? And somebody who can complete. That's why sometimes they favor short stories, because I want to see if you can complete like a narrative. So it's for them to see that you as a writer, you can be original with your own work. So it's, for me, I would say just be original with your own work.
Does anyone want to add to that?
I think I'll just add to that and just say there's a difference between a piece of work influencing yours and yours being strongly tailored after a popular work. I think I don't want to say sell yourself short when you are in that stage, because I think every writer at some point in time would learn through imitation. So if you write after a popular work, say for instance, you write a short story after Chimamanda's bird song, then you give the impression that you're still at that imitation stage and that you haven't formed your own voice and that you're not in at that phase where you're inventing. And I think they usually want people who can stand on their own and have a strong voice that can match to the beat of their drum, to the beat of their own drum, so that they're not coming into the program and saying, oh, the MFA voice submerged my own voice, and now my voice is the MFA voice. I lost my voice. I don't know if you've heard that before. I lost my voice in the MFA. I lost my voice in the MFA. Often people would argue that it's usually writers who didn't have a voice of their own in the first place, but were probably still at that phase where they were writing after other popular people. So you want to also tread carefully there. That's the only thing I have to say. No, applying early doesn't benefit anyone, because except you're a very anxious person and you want to, you tend to procrastinate, you have issues with maybe, I don't want to name any neurodivergent disorder, but there are people who aren't good at keeping to deadlines. And so having an early deadline for themselves and applying early sort of helps them plan better. If that's what your goal is, then of course, by all means, try to apply early. However, if you think you should apply early because you want them to take some time to read your work before they read everybody else's work, then I don't think you get that advantage, because from what I've heard and what I've seen, they usually wait until a few days after the deadline to collate all of the pieces of the applications and split it evenly amongst all the professors who will be reading, or the senior professors in the program. And so they can't do that sort of even job distribution if they have a pattern of reading things in batches. I think the only people who will do that would be maybe community college programs that just get that have rolling applications. So that would be like different if they have a different strategy. But if they have to give funding and decide on who to give funding once a year, then they would have to do things in a more coordinated fashion, and that would be waiting for everything to come in, splitting it evenly, and then doing all of those democratic processes. So I don't think it will give you any advantage. If you think you need more time to work on your application, please don't rush into submitting something that isn't ready.
Yeah, and I'll also add, I think you should submit when you know that you are ready, when you know that you're not going to like correct anything again. I know for most professors, like they read this work after like the deadline, especially during the Christmas break, that allows them to read, because when they are during school section, they are either grading or they are also reading books to teaching classes. So they don't really have time to read your application then until after the deadline. I think for most schools, the deadline is usually December 15th, and most academics or the first semester ends by that time. So you have to stay 17 downward until school resumes in January. So that is always like your own reading period to read applicant work.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who had questions and were able to ask them. And thank you to all the speakers. Thank you, Gochuku. Thank you, Tega. Thank you, Choma. Thank you, Triple K. This was a very enlightening session, and we look forward to hearing about people who were able to get into different MFA programs, and they were inspired by our webinar. Would it be possible to get your social media handles so that people here can connect with you?
Yeah, so very many of us actually listed our social media handles on our bios. But if anybody else wants to also go a step further, they're welcome to. I'm not sure if they're doing.
Okay. If you check the chats, you can see the social media handles and follow them and all. So this brings us to the end of the MFA application webinar. But be informed that we still have the PhD webinar coming up on the 31st. If you've not registered, I am putting the link in the chat so that you can register and join us on the 31st to talk about how you can apply for a PhD in writing related programs and get in. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, just
See you
a
on the
question. Is it possible to,
Okay.
I know I kept some links during my own application time. Is it okay to share with you to maybe send to others?
Yes, we're also updating that post on SOPs and actually put like a document. In fact, I'll share that document with all the panelists so that it's more like a community public document that people can populate and people can access through the website as well. Thank you. Thank you for your generosity. And we're also updating that post and adding more samples, SOP samples. So please keep checking that page, how to write your SOP. We'll keep adding new things as we go along. Thank you. Okay, so Ella, is this it? Should we call it? Oh, okay.
Yes, I wanted to add it again in the chat. Okay. Yes, this is the end of our webinar. I'm really happy that we're able to do this. I've learned a lot, and maybe I'll take a break and strengthen my craft suggested so that I can apply. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to all the participants.
Thank you to our panelists. So I think I should stop recording.